Don Kelly calls it passing the baton. I call it a purposeful contact approach. Either way, it led the Pirates to a 10-3 win over the Marlins. We'll talk that next on Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Welcome to Locked On Pirates. I'm Gary Morgan. The Pirates destroyed the Marlins last night 10-3. So, of course, we need to talk all about that. And what's led to the change in offensive philosophy. And then we'll touch a bit on how to approach the trade deadline, maybe, and some talk about the development team. And, the game was surprisingly great to watch. I mean, and here's why it's surprising. Because how many times have we watched the Pirates do some decent things and maybe even win a series, but they're just incapable of capitalizing on it or taking it any further than that, right? So part of me expected, well, Yuri Perez is coming back after being out of the game for almost 2 full years. And I don't know. I almost expected the Pirates to roll over and die and let them have this one because they were just coming off a good series. And I would say, like, when you run a team on emotion the way that Don Kelly has early on, that bubble tends to burst, and it tends to burst after you've accomplished something rather big, like sweeping the Phillies. So part of me did expect a little bit of a lull, and I am pleasantly surprised I didn't see it last night. 15 hit attack. Everybody in the lineup got a hit last night, including Brett Sullivan, who was making his Pirates debut and actually contributed quite nicely. Threw out a runner at second, had himself a hit, could have had 2 hits if it weren't for a really great play, but either way, got 2 knocks, walked. I mean, like, scored a run. Brett Sullivan was all over the place. The star of the game, Brian Reynolds, he had the biggest swing. Bases clearing triple that, really kind of put the Pirates ahead for good in this one and made it a more comfortable victory. So Mike Burrows didn't have his best stuff, but the bullpen was able to come in and really lock the door down. Again, Chase Shugart comes in and puts out a fire. Caleb Ferguson goes 2, and then Kyle Nicholas able to take it the rest of the way. It was a good game. And afterwards, Don Kelly is asked, like, well, what's changed? No home runs and out of those 15 hits and contributing to those 10 runs. I think a little bit of it. Don's too polite to give credit to the Marlins, but the Marlins kicked the ball all around the field last night. I mean, it was a circus show at times. And we've certainly seen the opposite side of that as Pirates fans for many games, where we were the team kicking the ball around. We were the ones that couldn't make that throw. We were the ones that, for some reason, completely forgot fundamental baseball exists. We were the ones that were turning a leadoff single into a double, or we were the ones turning a bunt into a triple. But last night that all went the Pirates' way. And a big part of that is the team openly seeking to make contact on pitches early and often. Yuri Perez was a guy that, hasn't pitched in a really long time. You're kind of assuming that he's going to be some facsimile of what he used to be, meaning you relatively know his pitch mix and you know what he's done in the minors on the way here. So, it's not as though he's surprising you with something brand new. He has introduced a new, sinker into his mix, although I didn't see him use it a whole lot last night. Um, he's still got the talent. He's still a gigantic human being. I think he's going to be really good. But first time back out on the mound, I can't imagine that's as sharp as he's going to be. It's not as sharp as I remember him being. And the Pirates, to their credit, didn't wait for him to develop that sharpness. They just kind of went right after him right away. The swings came early and often. He got through the first 1, 2, 3. But even in the first, Brian Reynolds, I think, showed the kind of contact he was bound to get off of Perez all night. He was seeing him really well. And ultimately, Brian Reynolds is the one that had that big swing off of him. And even that was actually a really good pitch. It was a pitch outside of the strike zone that Brian Reynolds reached out and touched and pulled into the right center field gap for that triple. That pitch is, I guess, in an ideal world, you're probably shooting that the other way, which seemed to be the Pirates' approach all night long, shooting balls the other way. They had that approach. They knew they were going to get pitched away by a lot of the guys that took the mound last night, and everybody seemed prepared for it, and everybody went that way. And the other side of that is, and this is where you kind of you're just getting a very small glimpse of the coaching situation in Miami, but it's one of those things where if it was my team, I think I'd be a little bit frustrated that the pitchers and the defense don't seem to be on the same page. And that's nobody on the field making those decisions. That's in the bench. You're telling these guys where to set up, and you've got your pitchers pitching in such a way that everybody's going to go opposite field on you if everything you throw is outer third. But your defense, you're still playing them like traditional pull or traditional, you know. And I guess what I'm saying is sometimes you have to alter your defense based on how you're pitching a team, especially if you start getting, 3, 4, 5 innings deep into a game and you can see the concerted effort to attack you in such a way. I mean, you at least need to stop shading your defense into those situations. Those are things that I don't feel right critiquing based on the team that I cover, but it's something real that I think we've seen the Pirates improve on since Don Kelly's taken over. I see them pitching to their defense a lot more often. Guys seem to be in the right place a lot more frequently than they used to be, right? You used to get those seeing eye singles all the time, and the Pirates seem to be in the right place a heck of a lot more often. That tends to speak to pitchers, first of all, really knowing where they're putting the ball, and defense being in the right place to understand where that ball is going to lead a hitter to hit the ball if they manage to make contact, which isn't a given against this rotation either. But the Pirates did this a little differently than their other formulas for wins in this 4-game stretch. This one wasn't led by a killer starting pitching effort. Mike Burrows was out of this game early, but the offense really, really stepped up. There was no mercy, no break, no being happy with the number of runs you got. They stayed aggressive the entire time, kept running the bases. The only thing that got less aggressive really was the sends from third base, which makes a lot of sense when you're up big. But this was an all-around impressive performance by the Pittsburgh Pirates. It really was. It's the culmination of weeks and weeks of work, though. We're going to talk a little bit when we come back about the development system. I just kind of want to remind you guys of some changes that took place last season, and I think maybe they kind of flew under the radar a little too much. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy to use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Join the Trademaster program at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. All right, welcome back to Locked On Pirates. One thing that I hear from you guys a lot is that this team can't develop. And it's not just you guys, because hearing that predates me being a Locked On Pirates host by a large margin. Okay. Like, I've been hearing this since before Ben Sherrington took over. I've been hearing this since he took over. And I just want to say that they made changes last year to this system. And I think one thing that Pirates fans need to understand is that when you make changes like this, I see them almost like changes to the government. Okay? Like when you elect some dude that tells you he's going to do, or he or she, I guess, tells you that they're going to do X, Y, and Z as soon as they get in office, and then you always wonder why X, Y, and Z can't happen. Then you start to see all of the mechanisms underneath and how long it takes for things to happen. Well, the Pirates just made some pretty major changes last year, and I do think it's probably a little too early to really feel like you've seen all of those changes pan out yet. For instance, they've kind of created this new position for John Baker. John Baker was originally hired as our top dog in development, and he was a mental health coach, mental strength coach. I'm not sure what the proper terminology for it is, but he was very focused on the mental side of the game with players. There's a place for that for sure, and it's an important part of I think a lot of teams. But the Pirates, I think this is probably Ben Sherrington's biggest mistake. When you come here to Pittsburgh, you know you have to do everything right on the development side in order to make the most of your talent and in order to, well, do this as cheap as possible. Let's be real. That's what they're trying to do here in Pittsburgh. Well, you can't have guys that have a lot of talent slip through the cracks if that's the case. And to me, if that's your goal, well, you don't hire somebody who is a mental strength coach to, for the very first time, oversee a development system. And that's what they did here with John Baker. Again, John Baker's a good dude. I mean, I actually know him. I'm happy he's part with the team. I mean, I like him being here. They didn't fire him. They just moved him to a new position, vice president of performance. But that's a more appropriate place for his skill set. I just think there's a time when you can hire a guy who's good overall for your system and important overall for your system and has something to bring to the table, but maybe it's not in the right place. John Baker is one of those guys, I think. There's a lot of good about John Baker and a lot to like about him. But as the overseer, let's just say I don't think that he necessarily knew what he was looking at or knew what he was leading at all times. Performance science is another thing that they've kind of worked on. What they used to have would be separate buckets throughout the development system. I'm going to try to explain this as best I can. but they would have something like nutrition over here, and strength training is over here, and mental strength right here in the middle, and they used to be all over the place. And it's not that they couldn't talk, it's just that they didn't necessarily all the time. So maybe the strength and conditioning guy would give the player a bunch of things they wanted them to do, and then at the same time the nutrition guy is giving them instructions on what to eat and how to do it and how to prepare it. And oh, I'm not taking into account what you're doing on the strength training side of things because I don't have any vision into that. So my meal plan is for you to be a healthy human being, whereas I need to be thinking about you being a strong, healthy human being who's actively exerting these extra calories training. And then you've got, and I'm making this as an example, okay? I'm not saying that I have anybody in particular that told me like they were making me eat celery and I almost died. Okay, like it's not like that. Just go along with the premise a little bit. And now they're kind of put them all under one bucket so that they're forced to talk to each other. They're coming up with player plans that are all encompassing, and they're taking into account all of the different aspects of it. This is, to me, one of those things that I think the leadership switch with John Baker moving out of the overseer position and being replaced, I think has brought an experience level that lets the entire system communicate better, and it has immediately paid dividends. There's much more of an understanding up and down the system of where a guy is, what he's working on, progression points, the check boxes that they need to get promoted. I think you're seeing more decisive decisions made on things like that, lower in the system as well. Baseball operations, there's new leadership and staff in areas like international scouting, research and development. Research and development is an interesting one because I don't think a lot of people think about that sort of thing, but this is kind of where you marry analytics into the training world a little bit, and you start developing it, based on research, ways that you can better incorporate that data into the everyday ongoings of a baseball team. You start doing things like that young, and you start getting the younger players indoctrinated into understanding what those numbers mean and how to affect those numbers and how to attack those numbers and what are good goal numbers. And when you start teaching that early, then when kids get to this top level, they're not as overwhelmed by it because a lot of this stuff has been used at the major league level for quite some time. It's just a lot of it would smack these kids in the face as soon as they got to the majors because they'd heard about some of this stuff. They've maybe been touched by some of it, but they hadn't lived it. They weren't like used to dealing with it every day. They weren't used to seeing their swing speed on curveballs versus left-handers in this situation, and then handed that right before they walked up to the plate. You know what I mean? I think for a player, it takes a while to understand what to ignore and ingest in a given situation. But the structure that they're using now, it's a lot more similar to what other teams do. I just think that they were really stubborn about this, and Ben Cherington may never really get to experience any of the benefits of this, beyond this year. Changes probably came too late for him, but I do think that at the very least, what I'm looking for is for you to understand when you are constantly saying they can't do this or they don't do this or You're basing it on what was, not what is. This system has changed very recently. I don't even think that you should expect seismic results for probably 3 years. That's that's how long it takes. Some of these international scouts and everything, when you start changing that stuff, you're talking about guys that probably start forming relationships with kids and families and small villages and towns, sometimes 5, 6 years before they sign a kid. They may know a kid when he's 11 years old, and he just looks like he could be a ball player, right? And they're making friends with the family, and the kid's playing baseball every day, and when he gets to be like 14, 15, you probably have made some kind of a relationship with them to the point where that kid is gonna sign with you when and if he gets to the point where anybody wants to sign him. And you could have been on the job for 5 or 6 years before you pick that fruit that you planted seeds for 5 or 6 years ago. Like years ago when Ben Charrington started here, one of the first international signings that they made, one of the bigger ones, was Po Yu Chen. Okay. And he's in AAA now. I mean, it's not important that he hasn't made the league yet because it has been a while, but he was a kid when they got him. This is a perfect example of a situation where the previous GM does not get to experience any of the pleasure of what he's set up. Neil Huntington's the one that set up that scout in Asia. Neil Huntington is the one that cultured that relationship that he was building with Po Yu Chen and several other players. And Ben Charrington is the one that traded for the extra assets and believed this scout that he'd never really met and funded making sure that they got Po Yu Chen. He was able to trade for more international pool money to get him the money to do that. Solomon McGuire, same thing. Another player that hasn't really panned out yet, but they picked him up when he was 16 years old from Australia. These are the types of things that predate your GM. And the next GM will get to enjoy the benefits of some of the changes that Ben Charrington's made here. They may swap figureheads and everything, but to completely change a baseball system, man, it's hard. And when you change like the international stuff, like the only successful international prospect the Pirates have had any time recently was Luis Ortiz. I think you're starting to see in the system right now, there's a lot more coming. I think that whole narrative will change over the next couple of years because the international players that are coming up now, they're a much different quality. There used to be a quantity over quality approach when it came to signing, international pool players, and now there's a much greater approach towards quality. And I think you're starting to see that pay off as the DSL and Bradenton are really starting to like ramp up. There's a freer and easier move up the system too. They're making more quick decisions, like Connor Griffin you just saw get moved up quickly. These are decisions that I think years ago the Pirates would have probably kept in their lane, stuck to their bucket. One of their check boxes was X amount of at bats. They've eliminated that from their list of check boxes for players. Now it's more of a skills checklist, things we want to see the capabilities on. So the development system has changed. I'm not telling you it's perfect, so please don't take it that way. But it is changed, and very recently. So at least be patient enough to see it kind of pan out a little bit. You may not like the figurehead. I totally get that. But that doesn't mean everything that he's done is wrong. He just may not be around to enjoy it. When we come back, I got a great comment from a listener on Instagram and a question along with it. And I really wanted to kind of dive into that for the last segment. You ever get home from an event and you look at your bank account and you go, what happened? Like if you hand your wife your debit card and she goes to the team shop on opening day and buys an authentic jersey for say $200, that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on Ubers when I would travel. Now I budget a little bit smarter, kind of plan my trips out a little bit better, and I save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's Monarch Money, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. All right, welcome back to Locked On Pirates. Thank you, everydayers, and I hope that this little winning streak has been a bit of a payoff for you for having watched the show every day, even when they were terrible. I really appreciate you. Hit that subscribe button for me if you haven't already. Those of you who aren't everydayers, and hit the like button as well. Really appreciate you interaction, like we just got from Tyler Rumley on Instagram. Hi, Gary. You mentioned today on Locked On how hitters are having a different approach with borderline pitches. Do you think it's possible that Cherington and Kelly both know he's a lame duck GM, and therefore Kelly and Haig are starting to implement their approach with disregard to Cherington's input? Something I thought of and would love to hear your thoughts about that possibility. So, I mean, that's exactly what you're going to get, Tyler, and everyone else too, I suppose. Let's talk about this a little bit because it's an interesting premise, and I get where it comes from. Again, this comes from you and the amassed media believing that Ben Cherington's no good at his job. So he definitely has to be being ignored if they're winning, right? I think that's where we tend to get to. First, I mean, it's a professional setting. If you've worked in an office or whatever, you always knew the dead man walking, right? When you're talking about doing when people talk about doing layoffs at work, and I don't know if that's happened to you, I hope not, but if you've been at a company where they're doing layoffs, you're often going to find that they'd rather take 2 or 3 big scalps that are close to retirement or whatever, or have kind of promoted themselves out of actually working. That happens a lot. Those are the ones that they tend to take because they can get rid of 3 or 4 of them, whereas if they wanted to save the same amount of money, they'd have to get rid of 30 or 40 of the actual worker bees. So I think that you'd be foolish to think that everyone doesn't know that Ben Cherington's on thin ice, for sure. Now, are they ignoring him? No, they're not actively ignoring him. I will say that I believe he has been asked to back off from the dugout a little bit. I think that was part of the condition of moving on to Kelly. And I think he won the battle in the offseason to keep Derek Shelton around. Bob wanted to fire him. He didn't. Bob let him talk him into it. And now that Bob has overridden his decision, and despite what Ben Cherington says, Bob Nutting made this decision. Don Kelly is the manager, and I think that Bob has given him a little bit of an assurance that his job isn't tied to Ben Cherington being here. So I think he's taken a lot of the guardrails away. There's no reason for Don Kelly to fear anything Ben Cherington does or whatnot. Do they completely disregard his input? No. They still need him to call up players that they need. They still need him to, do his job and give Kelly better players. I think they're listening more about guys that Kelly once called up and when, and things he needs addressed and ways they can do it internally. For sure. Kelly's not telling him who to trade for or anything like that. I will say the other thing they did that kind of probably went under the radar and really has changed a lot is changing um, that go between to the bench coach and the analytics department has really changed some things. Okay. They're still getting the information from the analytics department, but they're no longer getting it with a list of what that means they should do with it. They're getting it, and then Don Kelly and his team, including Gene Lamont, are sitting there and looking at that data, and Oscar Marin and obviously his team as well, Brett Strom. They're looking at that data and they're deciding what they should do with it and how they should implement it and what it should affect on the field and what it shouldn't affect on the field. And in general, the hitting philosophy that Matt Haig came in here with is kind of what you're seeing. Matt Haig is more of a contact um, type hitting coach. I know it doesn't look like that, when you watch him, the team that he came from, the Blue Jays, but just remember that Matt Haig was not always at the major league level. And a lot of their guys that were coming up there had natural power, but if you really think about what they do best, it's just hit the baseball hard, hit line drives around the baseball field. They hit home runs, but that's because good hitters that run into fastballs and whatnot are going to hit home runs on occasion. The launch angle is going to work, but they're not seeking it out. They're seeking out contact and hard contact and consistent contact. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that. I don't think they have the talent that, he's worked with in the past, but I think they're a little bit closer to having enough talent to score some runs than Derek Shelton was coaching them into having. And I also think there's something really probably insignificantly small here that we have to mention. Like Derek Shelton was a yes man, and I don't think Don Kelly's a yes man. I think Don Kelly is more of a I'll think about that type guy, or I'll put that in my bucket of information type guy, but I don't think Don Kelly is the type that's just going to take something that he thinks is nonsense and go out and try to do it anyway. I think a lot of this came up even when he was playing Tommy Pham there a little bit. Well, he's playing Tommy Pham because Tommy Pham was hitting better than Alexander Canario recently. It doesn't need to go that much deeper than that. Don Kelly wants to win right now. And he doesn't care what the record is, and he doesn't care that he's 25 games out of a wild card or whatever. He wants to win. And if that means that Tommy Pham plays over Alexander Canario, well, that's what he's going to do. And if it means that Alexander Canario is better, well, that's what he's going to do. And he doesn't care about the trade value of anyone. Right now, he's using Adam Frazier in left field or right field. That's not the most comfortable place to put him, but he wants his bat in the lineup. The guy's been hitting 350 over the last stretch. And Don realizes I can't give up the offense. So he's hitting better than Pham or Canario. So guess who's going to get starts out there? Guess who's going to get DH trips every once in a while? Brian Reynolds is going to sit and DH a little bit more often. Don basically is just allowing the data to show him something, and he's not clearing it with everyone. He's making decisions. Do I think that they have disregarded Cherington's input? No, just because that's not how professionals work. But do I think that there is less day-to-day interference? Yes. Yes, I do. And I certainly think there's more understanding of what you're asking of players because it's coming from a player. It's coming from someone that's done it, and fairly recently, and understands that when he asks somebody to sit on the bench for 5 days, what that's going to do to them, and understands what it looks like when somebody is feeling it in batting practice and he might need to make a change. I I think there's something to be said for that. But I don't think that it's just overtly ignoring the GM. Let's remember, just because we think that it's a no-brainer that he gets fired, and we're pretty sure he's a lame duck, and I bet Ben Charrington is pretty confident that he's a lame duck. I don't think he'd be here right now if there was absolutely no path to him keeping his job. And everybody in that building probably knows that. So before you go to try to take down the general, well, you best not miss, right? So I think there has to be at least a certain modicum of respect there and listening. But it's not what it was with Shelton. So you're observant there. Great question. Thank you so much for asking that. Contact me anywhere. I will try to answer them. That's all I got for you, everybody. Let's hope we can raise the Jolly Roger again tonight. Let's go for 5 in a row. Let's just do what we're supposed to do against a lesser team. And yes, it's okay that I said that. Let's go Bucks.